Hello, this is Kevin Padula, creator and host of The Story of Rhode Island. I recently had the privilege of sitting down with historian Dr. Erik Chaput, author of The People's Martyr, Thomas Wilson Dorr and His 1842 Rhode Island Rebellion, and co-author of the selected writings of Thomas Wilson Dorr. As you might have guessed, our conversation was primarily focused on Dorr. We covered everything from his early life, his radical democratic ideals, and of course, the political upheaval he eventually led. Not surprisingly, Dr. Chaput proved to be a wealth of information on all these topics. If you want to learn more about Dorr, I highly recommend reading the books previously mentioned, or at the very least, checking out Dr. Chaput's website, the Dorr Rebellion Project. I'll be sure to include a link to these resources in the show notes below. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. So, Dr. Chaput, thank you so much for being on the Story of Rhode Island today. I'm super excited to have you on the show.
Well, Kevin, thank you for having me. It's an honor, and I've been a fan of your work, and I'm very pleased that I can spend a few minutes with you and talking about the Dorr Rebellion and the life and career of Thomas Wilson Dorr.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we dive into Thomas Wilson Dorr, do you mind first telling my listeners a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you've done on the Dorr Rebellion?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a native Rhode Islander. I grew up in North Providence, and I really fell in love with history. I had an excellent high school teacher at St. Raphael Academy where I went, and then I went on to Providence College, and I was very fortunate when I was an undergrad to have Father Robert Heyman, a professor there, um, as my advisor, and I did a lot of work as an undergraduate on Rhode Island aspects of Rhode Island history. It's how I was introduced to the Dorr Rebellion as an undergraduate. I decided to continue with my work at Providence for a master's degree there in early American history, and I was teaching at LaSalle Academy and getting my master's at night, and had another opportunity to work with Father Heyman again, and in a bit of a more involved, deeper way, and did a lot of work at the Rhode Island Historical Society at that point. And when I was done with that master's degree, I was kind of convinced that I wanted to do this in a big way at that point, and so I decided that I would uh, ironically move west to Syracuse University for a doctorate, but to be able to study under several professors who were experts on early American history and the antebellum period, the time
Mm,
period of the Dorr Rebellion. Um, and one particular professor named William Wysick, who had written extensively on the rebellion in the 1970s. So it all kind of came together for me at Syracuse in regards to what I wanted to do as a graduate student and what I wanted to research. So after I finished my coursework, I turned back around, went east, and camped out at Brown University for several years, reading Dorr's vast correspondence and the newspaper archive they have there, and loads of time spent up in Worcester at the American Antiquarian Society, also looking at their vast newspaper holdings. And the outcome of that was a dissertation on Thomas Dorr and the Rebellion, and then I turned that into a book in 2013 that is now out in paperback. And while I was doing that work, since I went back into the high school teaching profession, I was working at a boarding school called Northfield Mount Hermon,
mm,
and I realized that I could make a contribution not only with a book, but if I could create a website that could help teachers tell this story. And I managed to get a job at Providence College in the School of Continuing Education, teaching classes. And
mm,
I met a man named Mark Caprio, who's now the head of the Phillips Memorial Library at PC. And Mark helped to really take an idea that I had in my head and make it come alive. So the Dory
mm.
Bellion Project website, in conjunction with my good friend Russell DeSimone, a wonderful historian in the state. We have now reached five different letter collections on the site,
Mm.
all aimed at teachers, exploring different aspects of the rebellion. And all these letters have head notes and questions for students and teachers and lesson plans that correspond with those particular letter collections. We have newspaper files and images and a pretty extensive gallery. And once again, all geared to help teachers in Rhode Island really bring this story into the classroom. So
Hmm.
everything that I've kind of done, I think, in my professional life as it relates to Dorr, I've written on a number of other topics, but at least as it relates to Dorr, I've always approached it with an eye as a teacher, and I'm a high school
Hmm.
teacher. Now I work at the Groton School in Massachusetts, and I always try to think about how this story that may be unique to a degree to Rhode Island, but is very much part of a larger national conversation in this period in the Jacksonian era, and trying to make sure that it gets its due. I guess I've
Yeah.
always been on a mission to make sure that other people know about it, and teachers can bring it into their classroom because a lot of textbooks don't mention it. There's only a few. Eric Foner's book, Give Me Liberty, which is a very popular American history textbook, does mention it, thankfully, but not
Hmm.
all.
Yeah.
So teachers, I think, are might struggle, and I wanted to uh, at least lift that off their shoulders by giving them something they could use. And the Door site has been one that we've been very pleased over the years, especially with National History Day projects of students that have discovered the site and dove into the letters that we have posted there, and so for me as a teacher, I'm very thankful that it's being used by teachers, in the state and beyond. We're contacted at times. Well, I was talking to someone fairly recently in North Carolina who had used the site, so that was
Oh,
great.
nice. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, whenever I read and like research the Door Rebellion, I'm kind of shocked it doesn't get more, like, it's not mentioned more in history books, or it's just not an event I feel like it gets the credit it deserves. So I definitely agree with you. But for people maybe who aren't super familiar with Thomas Wilson Dorr or the Door Rebellion, tell us a little bit about like who Thomas Dorr was and why the Dorr Rebellion is such an important story for people to hear.
Well, Dora grew up and I think there's a lot of misconceptions because the word rebellion is connected to, we're talking about the Dora Rebellion. So there's people that I think incorrectly have assumed that Dora had to have come from a lower working class family, a rabble rouser, and so forth, on the streets of Providence. And that is not the case. Actually, he grew up in absolute wealth. His father, Sullivan Dorr, was one of the wealthiest men in the state. His mother, Lydia, could trace her lineage all the way back to Roger Williams. And Sullivan's family just came from Boston. They were a very wealthy line of merchants. And Sullivan, when he was in Rhode Island, was involved in banking and insurance. Door's house on Benefit Street still stands to this day. It's, a beautiful, beautiful mansion. The original burial site, actually, the plot of land that is the for Roger Williams.
Hmm.
Dorr went and tended a boarding school, not that dissimilar to where I am now on the call with you at Groton, though Groton's late 19th century origins. Dorr went to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. From there, he entered Harvard as a young teenager. And after his career at Harvard in the 1820s, he went down and studied law with Chancellor James Kent, essentially at basically what would become Columbia Law School in New York, and came back and he had a fairly successful legal practice in the state. He at times even assisted the Attorney General's office in various cases. Um, and he was seemingly destined to a lucrative career as a lawyer. He's certainly had no shortage of money that could come down to him through his father. No question about that. And he entered the state legislature in the 1830s as a Whig and won several elections, several failed attempts, I should say, to enter the United States Congress in the 1830s. But started to make a name for himself um, as a good speaker, as a reformer, as a thinker in the 1830s. But certainly no real indication yet, though the reformer Dorr was on display. He was a devout abolitionist, in the middle of the 1830s. That was quite clear. He was thinking very widely about reforming aspects of society, and was no question early on. He was a major player initially in the Rhode Island Anti-Slavery Society, but probably not quite, thinking that he would be involved in a full-scale attempt to alter the sitting government of Rhode Island. But as the 1830s dragged on, Dorr became connected to, and certainly by the early 1840s, uh, efforts had been underway to reform Rhode Island's arcane governing structure. The state, in the wake of the American Revolution, had simply decided to carry on using the colonial charter, which for a time in the 17th and 18th century was a very democratic document. But demographics had shifted in the state. You had an influx of immigrants. So the charter was outmoded, certainly by the antebellum period. There's wide calls for manhood male suffrage in the Jacksonian period, connected certainly to the figure of Andrew Jackson himself. And but Rhode Island, the power brokers continued to block major constitutional reform. So there was actually a constitutionalist party, but it never really achieved anything in regards to its own metrics of constitutional reform. All of that was stopped. As you get to the end of the decade into the early 1840s, the Rhode Island Suffrage Party begins to hold fairly large rallies. There's, major calls for the broadening of the suffrage. Many states in this period, in the antebellum period, had, especially in the North, had eliminated property qualifications for voting. Many of them actually had done this in the wake of the American Revolution. Rhode Island still operated under a very stringent property qualification that, was a huge bar, at the time to overcome. This was not lifted. States did use these property qualifications on African American voters. So you have this, within the Jacksonian period, there is, putting Rhode Island aside for a moment, there's an increase in democracy, if you will, for white males in a broad way. At the same time that's happening in the Jacksonian era, there's a decrease in democracy for African Americans, free blacks in the North. So one going this way, one going down. But Rhode Island is this exception when it certainly comes to white males. And African American leaders, though, were clamoring for the right to vote in the state. At this same time period in the 1830s, early 1840s, is what's known as a Black Convention movement that's happening all across the North. There are calls for Black leaders in all major northern states for not only for suffrage, for equal access to public accommodations, to equal access to schools. This is an equal rights movement that's being spurred by Black leaders, across the North. This is all happening concurrently with calls for white male suffrage reform in Rhode Island. By 1840, 1841, Dorr gets connected to this Rhode Island Suffrage um, Association. Very quickly, he kind of moves to the top of the ladder, if you will. He's a good speaker. He's a big name, the last name of Dorr. He had been a former legislator. By this point in his life, he's changed from the Whig Party that he was connected to in the 1830s, the party of his father, over to the Democrats. The Democrats are, for those listening in on the call, it's kind of a complex party. You have Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats, and they can be pretty different in their views. And I'll try to circle back to that in a minute. But Dorr becomes connected to the Democrats in 1840. And by 1841, he's really uh, a power broker within the Rhode Island Suffrage Association. They are making calls. They're clamoring for constitutional conventions to be had. And as you get towards the end of the year, this is where this is such a remarkable story. There's a people's convention. There's a people's constitution that's drafted. Dorr plays a significant role in writing a constitution for the state. None of this is ever authorized by this General Assembly. Uh, they do not recognize this. That people's constitution is sent out. There's a plebiscite. on the People's Constitution. It's overwhelmingly accepted. Problem is, once again, there is no authorization to go about in this reform mode of constitutional reform outside of the assembly. So now, as you get into 1842, you got quite a bit of a brewing problem. And, as I tell in my book, the tensions begin to simmer. People are wondering, which way is this going to go? Is the assembly going to back down and just simply capitulate and say, we will adopt this people's constitution? We will recognize this people's constitution. Are they going to call their own convention? Of course, actually, they do call their own convention. They do put out, an effort to have a convention and make their own constitution. And what you see by the time you get to the spring is elections being held under different systems, different constitutional systems. Dorr, got talked into, though he initially was apprehensive and didn't raise his hand, to run for governor. And when he wins, he's known as the people's governor. Samuel Ward King wins an election still under the charter, as it becomes known as the charter authority in the state, is how it often gets referred to. So now you have two men claiming to be, the governor. There will be elections, additional elections, not just for the governor under the People's Constitution, but they're going to set up a legislative body, and people will win office in different components of that. This becomes by the time you're into the spring of 42, this is a serious problem. Like, who is going to go to the United States Congress or Senate? Like, who is the proper sitting congressman or senator? Like, who's going to be sent there? These questions begin to arise. Who is the president going to recognize as the governor of the state of Rhode Island? This is, once again, where the story begins to take on a quite dramatic mode to it. And I think for students in the classroom, this is, what I've always found that they really gravitate towards, of thinking like, wow, wait a minute, there was two people claiming to be governor at one point. Like, how do we settle this? How do you, is there a way to adjudicate this? Things got a little out of hand as you get into the middle of May of 1842. Dorr had no military training, was not inclined, I think, as a younger man, to really be someone you would think that would be advocating for any level of violence at all. But yet, um, perhaps pushed by some rabble-rousers down in New York City and stoked by the enthusiasm for his for his reform cause, Dorr gets into a position in which he is attempting to attack and take over the arsenal. And, with an indication, obviously, that he would use those weapons. And then, of course, what he do with them later, if it was successful. Now, thankfully, this attack did not really get off the ground. The cannons did not fire. No one was injured or hurt on that night. But for those living through that moment in Rhode Island, and I try to capture the story in the book I wrote called "The People's Martyr," that even though it was painted the day after as kind of the Dorr's failure in somewhat of a comic opera way, if you were living through that moment, you really thought that your city was going to go up in flames. People sent loved ones out of the city of Providence. Many went to Worcester for safety. Massachusetts had a Whig governor. There was real divisions, deep-seated divisions, and so the Whigs would, be aligned as Dorr's, or line up, excuse me, as Dorr's opponents. And they had a Whig governor in Massachusetts, and that seemed to be a safer place to go. But it was painted in the Whig press as Dorr's folly
Hmm.
of this failed attack. But for those, once again, in living through this, it was a very, very serious moment in
Hmm.
which, could those weapons have been seized, used? Obviously, blood spilt. The tensions were very high.
Hmm.
And After Dorr goes on the run a little bit after this failed attempt on the arsenal, by the end of June, there's an attempt by Dorr to kind of reconstitute the people's government in Chapatchit, in a small village in northern Rhode Island, and that never gets very far. There's troops that are marched from Providence to Chapatchit. Once again, no bloodshed. Troops scatter. A fairly sizable force from the charter government is essentially overruns and overwhelms the forces there, and they run off. No one loses their shots fired, but no one loses their life there. And Dorr goes into hiding. He goes into, as I call it, his exile period, and he looks for protection from Democratic governors in New England, and he finds it in New Hampshire. Massachusetts was not a safe place to go, so he skipped over that and went to ends up hanging out for quite a long time in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, and goes to Concord, where he's there living out in the open, protected by the governor. Um, he will eventually come back on his own volition, give himself up for arrest. Actually, this time of year, close to the end of October of 1843, and there is a trial the next year in 1844, and Dorr becomes the first person convicted of treason against the state. The second would be John Brown in 1859, convicted of treason against the state of Virginia. Of course, the outcome for Brown was execution. Dorr was not executed. He was sentenced to imprisonment in Providence, at the state prison in Providence, which is, or what is there now is the Providence Place Mall. And that used to be the Cove there on the other side, and that's where he was imprisoned. He spent about a year after the jury came down, and then he was released. And he spent the rest of his life pretty much in his parents' house from about 1845 to his death in December of 1854 and on Benefit Street. His health was ruined. He had some fairly significant health issues throughout most of his adult life,
Mm-hmm.
but his time spent in a dark, damp setting in the prison did not help him with. He had a lot of rheumatoid arthritis problems and some respiratory issues, and his health was very compromised after his imprisonment. But he wrote a ton, and he became a kind of a major player, at least on paper, within the Democratic Party in the North. And his imprisonment would serve as a rallying call for Democrats, especially in the election of 1844. And later, Dorr's ideology kind of comes back to us in a way that students might know from their textbook, the notion of uh, the popular sovereignty letting settlers decide the question of slavery's expansion. This becomes a strong part of the Democratic Party in the election of 1852 and 1856. 52 is a key victory for Dorr, at least, because that was his very good friend, Franklin Pierce from New Hampshire, that won that election.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dorr, later in life, sees his ideology, if you will, from the 1840s as playing out within the constructs of the northern branch of the Democratic Party, um, as it won several presidential elections in the middle of 1852 and 1856.
Mm.
He dies once again in December of 1854, so certainly before the Civil War. But he did write, and I tell him the end of my book, he was very cognizant of the threats to the Union that were being posed by the expansion of American slavery. And he does think about, once again, what transpired in Rhode Island and the ideology he used there and how that played out or was playing out in the contentious politics of the 1850s.
And so, like, when you think of what Dorr did in his life, it definitely had a substantial impact. Like he literally led a movement that bypassed the state government and created an entirely new government by partnering with the people. But then he also, you know, took to force and tried to attack the state government as well at the arsenal. So like overall, do you consider Dorr a hero? What do you think of him as like an overall historical figure?
That's a great question, and it's one I will admit that I have in my time as a historian thought perhaps a little bit differently at different points of my
Mm,
writing on Dorr, between a dissertation, a book, a new book on the that I put out on the writings of Thomas Wilson Dorr that just came out, where Rusty Simone and I, because Dorr was known as prisoner number 56 when he was in the state prison in Providence. That's the number of items we have in the book. But my mind has
mm,
shifted a little bit. Certainly, I often try to make the point to people who ask me this that Dorr was not a violent person. Dorr did not think about perhaps taking human life as John Brown did.
yeah.
There's often a comparison at times that people try to make to Dorr, Brown, revolutionaries, and so forth, taking matters into your own hands. Brown was not opposed to violence. Dorr was not like that. I think Dorr really tried to use his profound intellectual gifts and learning to do something meaningful with the people's constitution. I
Hmm.
really think that in Dorr's mind that he felt that the charter government was going to see the benefits of what he had done. He's
Mm,
not solely responsible for the people's constitution, but he's writing a good percentage of it.
hmm.
And in that it would be smoothly accepted. I don't think he did not go into it uh, anticipating the violent potential for violence that would be there in the spring of 1842.
Hmm.
Um, Nor did I think he went into it initially thinking of how much opposition the charter authorities would throw up
Mm,
against his movement. But with that said, he did not back down.
yeah.
He continued to forge ahead against the wishes of his parents, deep wishes of his parents. His sisters were all married to gentlemen and powerful men in the state that one of whom, Samuel Ames, was the quartermaster general of the state, whose job it was to capture Dorr
Yeah.
when all this went sideways. I can only imagine what a holiday dinner would have been like in the Dorr household, certainly after he got out of prison. But there were many, certainly within his family, who were asking him, including his own brother, Henry, he had several brothers, but Henry was also highly trained, went to Exeter, went to Harvard for his legal training, really wanted him to stand down. There were disagreements between Thomas Dorr and Henry Dorr about his ideology of the right of the people to alter and abolish. Henry saw that Jeffersonian ideal as really rhetorical flourish in the Declaration, where Dorr, his older brother Thomas Dorr, took that obviously quite seriously and quite literally.
Hmm.
There was differing interpretations within the family about essentially what was permissible constitutional change.
Yeah.
And and certainly that played out in a large way in Rhode Island, and there will be a Supreme Court case long after the fact in 1848 and decided in 1849. It had no bearing whatsoever on the rebellion because it was long done by that point. And Rhode Island did adopt a Martin Constitution in 1843. In the wake of the rebellion, the Assembly finally puts forth the document that is ratified. We call it the 1843 Constitution because that's when it went into effect the following year, though it was drafted in the fall of 1842, once again in the wake of the rebellion itself.
Hmm.
So you can argue Dorr's forceful attempt finally might have spurred the assembly to do something that it was certainly inclined not to do.
Yeah.
Um, and the outcome, once again, was a modern constitution for the state in a significant document.
Yeah. So, like, one thing that I always think is an interesting question that I want to ask historians is like, if we break up the Dorr Rebellion into a few key different phases, there's sort of the legal political action where Dorr is a part of the state government, as in the constitutional party, and he's trying to go through the typical flow of getting rid of the charter and adopting a constitution that fails, and then in 1841 it moves into like extra legal, if you can call it that, political action where the people, as you were mentioning before, like, literally come together and create their own government and elect representatives. And then there's the forceful action where they try to defend that government and raid the arsenal and things like that. So, like, at which one of those phases do you support? And, like, where do you think Dorr really was right in taking those actions? Like, at up to what point?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a question that was uh, very much not just debated by historians today. There's a wonderful scholar named Christian Fritz who's written extensively on the question that you've just asked here. It's a brilliant question.
Mm,
He's got a wonderful book called American Sovereigns that I would recommend to anyone
mm,
on this topic, where the Dorr Rebellion plays a role, but other major questions of rebellion in American history and questions of constitutionalism, where Fritz really covers in depthly, including events like the Whiskey Rebellion or Shays Rebellion that precede the Dorr Rebellion. What I would say is that Dorr um, saw that what was happening in Rhode Island, and here we are in the start of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. I think Dorr, there was these cross currents, if you will, from the past that Dorr saw that to make the world anew again, and that
mm,
you
mm,
could, um, because of the intransient, certainly, and justification was there in his mind after so many abortive attempts to um, craft a modern constitution. There was
mm-hmm.
this question of, denial of equal rights, and what could you do to bring that about. And of course, what they were beginning to include was this right of suffrage. Suffrage was not something that was really always talked about in the sense of equal rights in the 18th century. Becomes a very 19th century conversation, but it's kind of getting paired together with this ideology that's connected to the rights of the people to alter and abolish. This is a line directly from the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorr really saw an opportunity to use his legal training, his deep legal training, to write a constitution for the state and believe that he was justified in doing that. Like he ardently believed that. But as I
Yeah.
mentioned, his own brother, there's some significant letters that a couple we have up on the Dorr website and try to get at this in the most recent book on the writings of Dorr, where his brother, who also had a deep legal training, would say, "No, you're wrong. You're
Yeah.
viewing the power of the people in the wrong way."
Mm, mm,
Henry Dorr would say that the people have power on certain days, on days of election,
yep.
and that's it.
Yeah.
And once the assembly is formed, and like that's where the power is structured, that there is no outside of that. Um, and they were disagreeing about this very issue, the power, the role of the people.
Yeah.
And this was at the time, not later, historians going back and trying to hash this out. You had these constitutional arguments in the moment.
Yeah.
Dorr had a legal mentor named John Whipple
Yep.
that took him under his wing, essentially as a almost like an apprentice-like situation after his training in New York City. And as he comes back, Whipple disagrees with his former protege, if you will, deeply, and has a different understanding of constitutionalism. So I think for students, I often try not to tip my hand
Mm,
about my belief one way or the other.
mm,
What I always try to do, and I think in many ways, this was what sparked Rusty, Simone, and I to make the website in the first place, is because there was such clear divisions and discussions about major issues relating to the Constitution, constitutional change. When are the people sovereign? How
Mm,
much power do they have? Who can control it? Who can stop it? These were contemporary arguments and discussions that we wanted to bring up and out there.
mm,
And that led us to make that site. And I think it's once again what makes the Dorr Rebellion so fascinating. And
yeah.
I should point out too that what I tried to do in the book, and then I have learned, I will be the first one to admit, you continue to read, you continue to study, and I have learned a lot about the Black Convention movement since I wrote my book, and
Mm,
I've written about this later. That the same time period, you have abolitionists, Black abolitionists, talking about equal rights, talking about voting. They are disenfranchised. And during the People's Convention, there is a call to bring African Americans into the fold. Now, this would have been revolutionary. Many
mm,
northern states, New York, for example, had a stringent property qualification for African Americans set at $250. It really was a bar that was very high that essentially disenfranchised blacks in the state of New York.
mm,
What the possibility that was on the table in Rhode Island, and Dorr, once again, deeply connected to the abolitionist movement in the 1830s, high up in the Rhode Island Anti-Slavery Society, was that this would be a wide, potentially wide conversation about equal rights.
yeah.
Now, it didn't include women, but for African American leaders throughout the North who were talking about equal suffrage, equal access to public accommodation, equal schools, a removal of the color line, the People's Convention, the People's Constitution was very wide ranging.
Mm,
It
mm,
had that potentiality.
yeah.
Sadly, when they finalized the document, against Dorr's wishes, they inserted a white only clause. Dorr was against this thoroughly, but was outvoted. And here's the forces of Northern racism coming into play. People felt that they needed to make it more palpable to whites and to have a racist clause in it. Black leaders, though, and abolitionist editors throughout the North were the first ones to cry foul
Yeah.
and hypocritical, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how are you defining the people?
Yeah.
You go back to the American Revolutionary period in the 1770s, and I often use these documents in my class. There were calls after Jefferson's declaration, some even before the declaration in the summer of 76, where what would happen to slavery, to African Americans in the North? How far was this revolutionary rhetoric going to go? And the state of Massachusetts has up on, their state site some wonderful petitions that were these questions were posed. Like, what
Mm,
does the revolution mean? What does liberty mean? What is this declaration that has this high-flying language of all men created equal mean? Not a contemporary for us today, but at the moment in time in which people were, asking questions about the meaning of the revolution for African Americans in 1777, for example.
yeah.
For Dorr, in Dorr's lifetime, that same thing was happening with this Northern equal rights movement that was underway, happening at the same moment. There's a conversation in Rhode Island about equal suffrage and creating a constitution that is going to remove these vestiges of an arcane governing system. And
Yeah.
the question became of how expansive that was going to be.
Yeah.
And Dorr is a part of that.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I liked your book on Thomas Wilson Dorr so much is because it dives so much into that topic of deciding to leave Black people out of the People's Constitution voting process, and then the abolitionists responding to that and protesting it, and some of the tensions there. So I enjoyed that part because I'd never heard that before. Um, I know you have to jump in like a minute, but one last question I want to ask you is if there's one point in Rhode Island history that you could go back to and witness in person, whether it's the Dorr Rebellion or a completely different time, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I will admit, and with the revolution I'm highly anticipating Ken Burns's film as a teacher, and I'm going to be writing about it for Small State Big History.
Mm.
Um, I think I would love to go back, to the night of the Gatsby, if I could. Maybe not be directly involved, but witness this, from the
Mm.
shoreline, if you will, hidden behind a rock or a bush. But
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about, the American Revolution, and Rhode Island's place in this, and really, and the importance I think that nationally we're going to place on Ken Burns's 12-hour film. And for me, once again, as a teacher, I am so excited for this. But I have been thinking a lot, I will admit, about where is the burning of that ship, that schooner, that vessel fitting into
Mm.
a big powerhouse production, or not,
Yeah.
and in you know, and thinking about the origins of what happens as you get to 1775. So I'm really look forward, and I've been honored that Christian McBurney is going to give me some time and space to write about each episode for a small
Mm.
state, and I'm going to take full advantage of that, and write 5 or 6 pieces for his site about the film, and hopefully teachers will. I'm going to aim it at a teacher to tell them how they could connect the film with different aspects of the revolution, in Rhode Island in their classroom. So that's the work I'll be doing as soon as that film debuts in a couple of weeks. I think it's November 16th is the first episode that's going live, and so for me, that's kind of where my mind is. And I guess if I had to pick another one, it may be on the day that Dorr was released from prison.
Mm.
I think I would have
Interesting.
loved to have walked home with him.
Oh, wow. Good answer.
I think I would have loved that walk home, as he left there. And of course, to a degree, he's lucky he was not executed. And when he was in the cell, he wrote quite a few letters. They were smuggled out. I have them up on the Door website to his mother. We call
Mm.
them the Dear M letters. They're a little bit difficult to read, though we did post the original. He wrote them in poor lighting, fast, on scraps of paper that were smuggled out, most likely by his friend Catherine Williams out of the jail cell, and as she came in to visit him, and handed it to his mother. He maintained a very close relationship with her, and she, vice versa, was clearly writing back. Though we don't have those, he got rid of those, probably because he didn't want anyone to find out.
Mm.
But I just would have loved that walk back home, and to say
Yeah.
like, "Hey, was this worth it?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you thinking now? Your health is definitely ruined.
Yeah.
In some ways, maybe you're lucky to be alive. How do you see yourself playing out? I mean, in American history, Dorr had an eye to that. He loved American history. He had to deeply be thinking about the way he was going to be remembered. Of course,
Hmm.
he never went into anything in 42 thinking the word rebellion was going to be, that's a tag that was put on by because he lost, right?
Yeah.
Just like whiskey rebels, right? They didn't
Yeah.
operate with the word rebels or rebellion. That was to the victor goes the spoils, right? And you get to
Yeah.
write the history. But that, to go back from carriage ride, say, from the Providence Cove area up to the hill on Benefit Street, just a chat in the back, so to speak. That would have been fun.
Yeah. Great
Mhm.
answer. Definitely some awesome events to be a part of. I feel like I definitely would have been on the shore line of when the Gatsby went down. Probably not tough enough to be on one of those boats.
Yeah, I don't think I would have wanted to be directly on the deck. Just watch it, see maybe who was, could I pick out some face, and that's, okay. That
Yeah.
would have been fun. Totally would like to be safe, and but um, I think for all of us as we wait for Burns's film is to think about the role of the state, and it's a significant one.
Hmm.
Uh, and I encourage all your listeners to think about going to the back files of Christian McBurney's site, Small State, Big History. I think that they'll find a lot uh, of wonderful articles over the last pretty much close to 10 years on the American Revolution.
Yep. For sure. All right. Well, Dr. Chaput, thank you so much for being on the show. I greatly appreciate it. And appreciate your time.
Well, Kevin, once again, thank you, and thank you for all that you do. You're a true unsung hero, an educator, in a profound
Thank you.
way. And I really hope that your site and all these podcasts get used by
Thank you.
students in particular. And it's been an honor to be here. So thank you very much. And please carry on for all of us. Thank you.